And by the time I got to year 4, I was like, this is going to happen. In a year, I can quit my job, having replaced the majority of my income. So I basically worked 2 jobs for this 5 the overlap during that 5-year period. But it happened, and I haven't looked back, and I'm so glad I can do this full time.
Hey Islanders, and welcome to episode 115 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with the featured Artist of the Month for October. Please welcome Elizabeth Person. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview folks around Camano Island and beyond. If you want to stay up to date on events, businesses, and even hear a little history of this area, subscribe to this podcast and share with your friends. Thanks for listening. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. And welcome back to the podcast. Thanks, you guys, for those of our my loyal listeners. I know there's at least 3 of you out there, so appreciate it. I just want to say thanks real quick for you guys to continue to support. And also, if you guys want to share the podcast, I'm still trying to really figure out how to grow the podcast, get it out there so more and more people, specifically the Islanders here on Camano Island. We've got a lot of people here on this island, Stanwood Camano area. And I'd love to get more of those people here on the podcast, listening to it, finding out more about this community. So if you guys have any people you can share this with, I'd really appreciate it. So today I get to speak with Elizabeth Person. She is the featured Artist of the Month in the Loft, which is the upstairs of the marketplace, for the month of October. So upon recording this, we've already actually sold 2 of her paintings, including the original Camano painting that she references in this podcast. So you can check it out on the website, and she does have prints of it available, but just know the original one that was part of the show has already sold, which is unfortunate because it was such a cool map. Not unfortunate, very fortunate. I'm really happy, but sad that you guys don't get to see it. But you can check out prints of those still online. But I loved speaking with Elizabeth. Actually, my wife had found Elizabeth Person's work on Instagram and looking at the maps and stuff that she made. And then, really wanted to bring her into the marketplace. And when we eventually did, we moved through her postcards and all the different things that she had. She moved through them very quickly. And then Lydia, who manages the Loft upstairs, wanted to have her as the featured Artist of the Month. And so that's already seemed like it's going very well there as well. But one of the things that I really enjoyed speaking to Elizabeth about was the amount of planning that she had moving into being an artist. We all live in this world that I think we're in this instant gratification culture, and we always expect things to happen. 2 years seems like a long time for us. In 2 years, I expect to be able to do X, whatever that is. And she had a 5-year plan that she was working through from working a job that she did enjoy, but wanted to really move into this art thing. And so she, as she checked those boxes, then she knew she was ready to step out on her own. And so we talk a little bit about that. She gets into a lot of the different art things that she's done, as well as her creative process. And we dive into how she went about getting the names and stuff for the Camino Map. So anyways, really good conversation. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Elizabeth Person. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with the featured Artist of the Month for the month of October. Please welcome Elizabeth Person. Oh, I probably got that wrong.
No, that's perfect. It's a weird last name.
Okay.
Very Scandinavian, and it's down the years, it's just Person.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Do you pronounce it Person when you're talking?
Yep, I do.
Okay.
Yeah. Back in the day, it was Person, but now it's just Person.
Nice. All right. Well, before we get started, tell us a little bit about Elizabeth.
Sure. Well, I am an illustrator based in Everett, Washington, and I grew up in Snohomish County, so this is my home area, and I've always loved art and drawing, and I'm thrilled to be a full-time artist. I was a graphic designer for about 10 years and then made the transition to full-time art about 4 years ago.
Okay.
But it was a long time in the making.
Yeah.
So, that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
Nice. Very cool. So you said you grew up in Snohomish County. What did you grow up in Snohomish or just in the surrounding areas?
Yeah, I grew up in unincorporated Snohomish County, smack between Marysville, Granite Falls, and Lake Stevens.
Okay.
So we had a Lake Stevens address, Marysville School District. It was a funny location.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. How was that growing up in that area?
It was wonderful. I grew up in an air park, Frontier Air Park, which I don't know if a lot of people have heard of, but it's a community where about 80 homes share a private airstrip.
Okay.
Which sounds super fancy, but it was quite the gamut of homes and reasons that people live there. Mm-hmm. And my dad is a private pilot, and growing up, my grandparents lived in North Dakota, and we'd fly from our house directly to their farm every summer to go visit them.
Nice.
So, yeah, it was a more affordable way to travel back in the day with the four of us, since my dad was a pilot.
Right.
And it was really rural and beautiful and quiet. I didn't realize that until now when I go and visit home, I'm like, it's so quiet here. It's really lovely.
Yeah. Very cool. So what type of plane did you guys take when you would fly?
It was a 1959 Piper Comanche plane.
Okay.
So a little four-seater, and planes there aren't a ton of newly manufactured small planes. This could be wrong, but I should say a lot of the flying fleet is very old, and it's just maintained meticulously.
Yeah.
So it was a very old plane that had been updated.
Okay. And is it one you guys just rented as whenever you went out there then?
No, my dad had it.
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
He owned it. Yeah, and
okay.
It's a very old aircraft like that is about the same cost as like a sports car, surprisingly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. So was he the one that kept it and everything?
Yep. Yeah, and you work with a certified mechanic every year to do an annual with private planes. And the reason I'm going into this is because it's relevant with what I do now.
Well, that's what I was kind of wondering. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was that, as a kid, I guess, first of all, as a kid, was that weird? It's not weird because it would have been normal for you, but was that something like every time that you did the flight, was it something that you guys really looked forward to?
Oh, that's a great question. It was kind of my normal, like going in the plane to visit Grandpa and Grandma. There are photos of me as a baby sleeping in the plane. It was just our experience. And my grandpa had been a aviation mechanic in World War II, and I just was surrounded by people in aviation, and of course, being near Boeing, there are a lot of private pilots in this area.
Yeah.
And I didn't think too much about it. But I have always loved maps, and there were always maps in the house, like of navigation maps and aerial maps. And I think that has really appealed to me because now I specialize in illustrating maps, and in particular aerial maps. So I spent a lot of time in the air, and I think that influenced me heavily.
Yeah. Was that when you were talking with like friends and stuff growing up, did they think it was weird that you just would fly to see your grandparents and stuff?
That I don't know. Maybe I guess I had a lot of the same friends growing up my whole life, and they'd all been in the airplane, and I think it was just a weird normal thing. Like some people have a boat and some people have an old airplane.
Okay, very cool. So you grew up in that area. Then when you graduated high school, what was kind of your plan after that?
Yeah, I knew I loved art, but I was also interested in other things. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to go to college, and I was looking at a school where I could either study history, art, or education. So I thought I might want to be a teacher, might want to be a history major or teacher, and then might want to be an artist.
Okay.
And I ended up pretty quickly just loving art classes and specializing in illustration. And my parents were very supportive, and I felt like they never doubted I could make a living doing art. Okay. And that's just such a rare thing among so many art majors. Right. People are often discrediting it, or there are challenges sometimes to finding a full-time career in the arts, but there are challenges in every industry, and I think it's really possible. So I want to do a little thank you to my parents and encouragement to anyone who's listening to pay attention to the possible careers in the arts. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, it's what you're saying is true. Like when it comes to any career or any path that you end up taking, there's always risks. There's always these different things you have to deal with. And I think the art community has maybe not expanded, but just the opportunities have expanded in what they're needed in now.
I think that's true. I think that's a positive contribution of social media is the access to arts and the new interest in handmade items, because people are tired of, they don't want to order everything from Amazon and have it delivered the next day.
Right.
And people are very interested in the process of making art and the how-to and the background that you don't always see when you go to a gallery and see a finished painting.
Right.
And those are really easily expressed through social media.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think we've gone through the age of probably 80s and 90s where they had just big prints of whether it was art, reprints or even just nice photos or pictures, stuff like that. A lot of that stuff I think is now getting closer to okay, everyone's seen the manufacturer, now you can find that at Ross or whatever, and but people are now more aiming towards local artists or different things like that. Again, like you were saying, they want to be connected to it and not just have a nice looking picture on the wall, but have more than just that.
Yeah. Yeah. So. I feel like it's a great time to be in the arts.
Yeah. Very cool. So, so you started going to college and really enjoyed the art classes. As that was progressing, what was kind of, as you talked with professors, fellow students, what was kind of your goal of once you were planning to graduate and everything?
I got really interested in publishing and the whole publishing industry. I would say my dream was to illustrate a children's book at the time, but I was also really interested in the art, the business of art, how does a book get published and how can I be part of that? So my plan after college was to move to the East Coast because almost the vast majority of publishing houses are in Boston and New York.
Yeah.
And that was my plan. But then I moved back home because I went to college in the Midwest in Indiana, and I was just ready to be back in the Northwest for a little while. So I moved back home, and I accidentally got a gig through a family friend doing a graphic design. And my interview was, do you know how to turn on a Mac computer? So I got the gig, which turned into a full-time job as a package designer for a boutique candy company.
Okay.
So I designed.
What's the candy company?
The candy company is no more, but they were out of Woodinville, and we would do private labeling for Nordstrom or Target and put their designs on our product.
Yeah. And
it was a really great job. I learned a ton, and I learned on the job. I learned from my printers. I learned from the vendors. I was the only graphic designer there. I learned from the internet. So I'm thankful for the experience of that job. And then that led to, I worked for a children's company for 7 years in Linwood.
Okay.
In an in-house creative team. And that was also a really positive experience. So I did graphic design, but I also, in hindsight, was learning so much about business and management, project coordination, how to work with a sales team, how to work with a CEO, and all that sort of thing. And I'm really grateful for that experience. But I got pretty itchy about, maybe 3 years into that, just thinking I enjoy graphic design, but this was not what I planned to do, as a kid, or this isn't what I studied in college. And so I really felt like I hit a crossroads and kind of boiled it down to either I need to go back to school to get more education and do what I really want to do. And I kept coming back to history and art and education, or I need to try to become a full-time artist because that's been my dream since I was a kid.
Okay.
So I thought about it for about a year, and I decided that I was going to I was like, I got to try being an artist. I'm going to be mad at myself if I don't try doing this.
Yeah.
And so for me, being an artist, I'm putting that in quotes, meant supporting myself fully, all my income coming from making art and being able to do that confidently, not stressed out.
Right.
So to me, that's what being that's what being an artist meant. So I made a 5-year plan of here's how I think I can transition from full-time graphic design to full-time art.
Yeah.
And it started out with little things like open an Etsy shop, at the time I was taking on a lot of freelance graphic design in the evenings. And I thought, what if this is art time? So I started spending one night a week just making art.
Okay.
And that was I had pretty modest goals the first year. And then it got pretty outrageous, make $5,000 for my Etsy shop and, reduce my hours at work down to 4 days a week. And year by year, I started ticking all those things off. Yeah. And by the time I got to year 4, I was like, this is going to happen. In a year, I can quit my job, having replaced the majority of my income. So I basically worked 2 jobs for those 5, that overlap during that 5-year period. But it happened, and I haven't looked back, and I'm so glad I can do this full time.
Yeah.
But I just want to underline it took a lot of planning, and
Yes.
it took a lot of preparation, and it took a lot of hard work to get the momentum going. And then it got easier.
Yeah.
But it's still hard, but it's awesome to know that I can do it, like
Right.
with confidence, that this is a way I can support myself, and I'm confident that until I choose not to or something crazy happens, it'll be what I continue to do.
Yeah. Well, and I want to, what you're mapping out there, I think is just so important. We obviously live in an age where everything is like, immediate gratification and all these different things. And even as an artist, again, you knew what your goal was, you knew what you wanted to do. And just the fact that mapping out those 5 years and saying, okay, so year 1, this is what I'm looking at. Year 2, this is what I'm looking at. I think when we're looking at either career changes or things like that, like I know I've talked with a lot of people that, decide, you know what, I really want to work this type of job, because if I work this type of job, I can do, I can work from home or wherever I am, or I can travel, and they have these ideas, but they end up, they're like, okay, so in 2 years I want to do this, like fully transition careers to this. And like, that's just not realistic. And
right.
For like almost any career, that's not realistic.
Right. And I think it's unrealistic in 2 ways. Often you don't have the skills yet that you're going to need. And then often you don't have the business savvy or time it takes to develop a business.
Yeah.
Like you can't just make, well, you can, but if you want to make money from your art, you can't just make art and people are going to buy it. Like that's not how it works. It takes time to build your audience, to promote yourself, to create a brand, like a logo, to create a website. Like that all takes time.
Yeah.
And so I think it's naive to just jump right into it, in my experience.
Yeah.
And I will say some people do that and it works for them because they're like an all-in kind of person. I'm a planner and I'm a low risk tolerance person. So that's what worked for me. And I do think that it can happen more easily than people think if they take the time to map it out.
Yeah. So what did year 1, 2, and 3 kind of look like for you when you were getting started?
Well, I started out with that one night in the studio, and I actually met with a friend, and we would paint together for the accountability. And then it became really easy. Like Monday nights was art night, and then Tuesday nights became art night because I'd get into a project. And I should say during that time, I didn't know what my medium was going to be. At the time, I worked in acrylic paint, and I eventually, like now, I work exclusively in ink and watercolor.
Okay.
And I had done a little bit of watercolor, but it wasn't my favorite. Watercolor is messy. It's hard to control. It's got a mind of its own. It wasn't my favorite. Acrylic is my jam. Drawing is my jam, where you can erase, you can change, you can paint over. But I loved how watercolor looked. And as I kind of developed this informational art style, I realized pen and ink and watercolor is perfect because I can be really precise and careful and write on my drawings with ink pen. And then I can add spontaneity and color and beauty through the watercolor. Yeah. So that all like finding my style was another kind of woven into that 1 to 3 year period of time when I was figuring out how I was going to be a full-time artist. Yeah. And I feel like I landed on my medium and my subject matter all at the same time. Okay. And so to the listeners, I specialize in informational art, specifically maps, and any kind of like charts or graphs. And I always have an educational component to my art because that's what lights me up. That's what I'm interested in. Like I've done a chart of all the presidents. I've got a citrus chart of the most common kinds of citrus and how they're all related to like 4 genetic ancestors. And, through my art, I'm exploring information and it feels really sustainable to me. I love making maps. I might not always do that, but I think I'll always do informational art. Yeah.
Very cool. So as you were kind of working through that, when you were starting to do art, when did you do your first sale of the art you had been working on?
Oh, sure. That's a great question. Well, I kind of had a period in the spring early on where I made a lot of pieces, like maybe 6 pieces. And I started getting friends asking me for prints. So then I was like, oh boy, I got to figure out how to make prints of my art. I had no idea. Like, do I take my own photos? Do I get this scanned? And I had some connections in Everett with some local artists in a frame shop. And they told me, well, you can get here's our fine art printer that we use. Why don't you use him? And then I got a batch of prints made up, and that's when I opened my Etsy store. Because I was like, okay, now I have a product. So I think I had 6 different drawings on Etsy, and I think I made maybe like 3 sales for that first year. Like it was part of a year.
Yeah.
And then the next year, I think I made 12 sales. And I remember the first one I got was from a woman who lived in the Midwest who I didn't know.
Yeah.
that was a big deal. My first online sale to someone I didn't know.
Yeah.
And then I started doing pop-up festivals. That was a big step. I paid $40 and got a little cardboard table that was like 3 feet by 3 feet and did an Everett Makers Market in downtown Everett. And made a couple $100. That was pretty exciting. So, it was that kind of a thing. Like I definitely put more money into the business for the first few years. And then my Etsy shop did grow. I remember I had a big goal of making 200 sales. I think this was year 4 of my transition plan. And I got 200 sales over the course of a year, which is great, but that's still not the kind of that's not going to pay my mortgage, you know? So I was supplementing it through doing commissions for people. So a lot of portraits. I drew a lot of animals. I started painting people's houses, like not actually painting their house, but painting a portrait of their home. Yes, just to clarify. And I got advice early on to diversify how I made my income as an artist. So now I make my income through selling wholesale to stores. I sell direct to customers through art festivals and art markets. I license some of my work, so the image is used, let's say, on a website, and they pay me to use a map on their website. Then I have gotten a little into publishing. I did get to illustrate a children's book, which was my dream 2 years ago. It came out. And then through commercial work for clients. So and that has really helped me weather like last year in 2020 because I had all my income from art festivals completely dried up. I had one art festival before the pandemic started in the spring of 2020. And then, for example, in 2019, I did 27 art festivals and art events throughout the year. In 2020, I did 1.
Oh, my word.
So that whole income source completely dried up, which was about a third of my business. But I was really able to pivot towards taking commission work from individuals and from businesses. And my online sales dramatically increased because people are awesome and value art and started shopping on Etsy. And I launched my own store through my elizabethperson.com, and people could buy directly from me. So I just felt really grateful to my customers. And then I was also thankful for a business plan that allowed for flexibility in how I make my income.
Very cool. Yeah, that's great. I think, I mean, you meet all types when it comes to artists, people that come from all different walks of how they got to that. But I can definitely see all of your business experience on that end of building out your art business, because you've done so much more in that than just sticking with this very single-faceted, this is what I want to do and this is what I'm going to do. Right.
Yeah. It's definitely been a mix of, with art, you have to listen to your instincts and your guts and your likes and dislikes. But with the business of art, sometimes you don't just do what you want to do. Like, I have to spend time marketing, which I don't love. I have to spend time making art that maybe isn't my cup of tea, but is within what I can do, especially early on. You don't just get to paint exactly what you want to be successful. I think it's pretty rare for an artist's experience to be they're only doing what they like all the time. And so in that way, it's not too different than any other job.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, very cool. So upon specializing in, you were kind of working out your medium and what you really wanted to do. After year 5, what was that like for you when you were, what was it like for you quitting and then actually day 1 starting on your own?
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed my job. I really enjoyed who I worked with when I was a graphic designer for that children's company. But I was very excited to give notice and be able to do my art full time. And I remember I left at the beginning of August, and then the next day I went up to Bellingham and bought a car that could fit all my art supplies when I did art festivals. Because I had a Toyota Camry, and I got a Honda Element, which is like that car looks like a toaster. It's like completely square, fits so much stuff. It's awesome. So I remember my coworkers were teasing me that I, blew a couple $1,000s immediately after quitting my job. And then I got really fortunate in that I got an email 2 weeks after I left my job asking if I wanted to illustrate a children's book. And that was an email from a children's book editor from a publishing company here in the Northwest called Sasquatch Books.
Okay.
And their children's imprint is Little Bigfoot. And that book ended up being To Live on an Island. And it was written by Emma Bland Smith. And it's about a day in the life of a little boy who lives in the San Juan Islands.
Okay.
And because my dad is a pilot, I grew up flying to the San Juan Islands every summer.
Yeah.
And, because it's so much faster. When we flew to the islands, it would be about 20-minute flight versus a 3-hour ferry, which I love the ferries, but it's a long haul to drive to Anacortes, take a ferry. So I've been to the San Juans, I've spent a lot of time there. So being able to illustrate a book set there was really special.
Yeah.
And it was also a large chunk of money. I'm not saying it was lucrative, boys and girls. It was not lucrative, but it was a large chunk of money. And that felt really wonderful after having just left my job and knowing, okay, this is working. And what else? It was a little overwhelming to have all my time to myself and have to decide how to spend it. I'd say that was a big challenge. I wasn't worried. I'm very intrinsically motivated. I wasn't worried that I wouldn't work enough, but I didn't know how to arrange my time. And I didn't know when to take a break and when to, should I go have a lunch with a friend? And when do I need to keep my nose to the grindstone? Yeah. So it took several years to sort through that. It's still difficult, but it's really a treat to be able to be in control of my own time.
Yeah. What are some of the time management things you kind of implemented? Did you block out calendar, or did you just, kind of go with the flow?
Oh, that's a great question. Let's see. How did I do it in the beginning? Well, I started a little goal that every day I would walk to the post office.
Okay.
And at the time I didn't have orders every day. So sometimes I would at the time I would go once or twice a week to the post office and group any orders that I got. But anytime I got an order, I would walk to the post office that day to drop it off. And I live about a mile away. So it was a walk. So it was kind of like a reason to get out, to exercise, and then a little discipline to keep on top of my orders. Or, so I tried to I tried to walk at least 2 miles every day. That was part of my time management.
Yeah.
And then what else did I do? I remember I slept a lot. I took naps, and I'm not a nap person, but after working full time and then suddenly being cut loose, I was like, I'm taking a nap at noon because I can. There was a lot of walking to the kitchen to get snacks, kind of all the things you do when you are first let go of something. And now I've settled much more into a routine. And I usually spend so on average, I probably spend 3 hours a day doing art, but that's a really rough average. I go through cycles. So sometimes I go for 2 weeks and I don't touch a paintbrush, but then I'd say 30% of my time is spent making art. Okay. And the rest is not. The rest is admin, the rest is shipping, the rest is hanging shows, setting up for shows, ordering supplies, and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, all the other aspects. It's like running a business. You don't end up spending most of your time doing the business side. You do, or the what makes you the money. You do all the other stuff that supports as the money comes in.
Yes. And just this last fall, I was able to hire an assistant, and she helps me pack orders and helps me run shows. Oh, nice. And she works for me. Started out 1 day a week. Now she's working for me 2 days a week, and it'll bump up to probably 3 days a week during the holidays. And that's been really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Nice. So you had been doing all of these things then. And then when you were, starting to do more shows and all this stuff, how did you kind of did you just kind of open it up and do as many shows as you could, or did you kind of try them all and then figure out which ones you really like? Yeah,
the latter. I tried a lot. I just figured, why not? And I should say too, at the time I wasn't married and I don't have children. So I know that opens up options. And if you are married or have children, or, there are a lot of, or taking care of someone, a parent, you don't have as much flexibility. I had a lot of flexibility. Yeah. So that was one asset I had where I could try a lot of different things. So I tried a lot of different shows. Yeah. I did pop-ups at breweries. I did big art festivals, 3-day art festivals. I tried shows up in Bellingham, down in Tacoma. I even drove to Portland for a show, and that made me have some criteria. So for example, now I try to have the fee of the show be no more than 10% of what I earn. Okay. So that was a good gauge for me. Some shows are very expensive, but you make a lot of money.
Right.
Some shows are very expensive and you don't make that much money. They just are prestigious.
Yeah.
And I realized, why would I do that? Like that's not a savvy business decision for me, the way I run my business.
Yeah.
So that was helpful criteria. And then I will say the pandemic made me realize I don't have to do all of these festivals. I can focus on online sales and I can really specialize more.
Yeah.
So that's been a silver lining.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah, we actually got to, so my wife had been following your art and stuff for quite a while. Actually, prior to us buying the business, she was following you and on Instagram and stuff. And she's like, I really like, all the stuff she does. And I think we should carry some of her stuff. And then then we went through the process of buying the business, which took a very long time. And then, first year in the business and everything. And so eventually we circled back around. And I think at that time, you were also had started working on the map of Camano, because you had done one of Would-Be Camano, and then you were making one that was focused just on Camano. And so I think during that time you were working on that one, we ran into you at one of the shows up there. I don't remember if it was up in Bellingham or if it was down south. Brittany had organized it, so I just was like, all right, I'll go.
You're along for the ride.
Yeah. But yeah, really enjoyed the style of art that you were doing and all of that. So yeah, I'm really excited that you get to be the featured artist this month. And all of the things that we've brought in from yours, all the prints and stuff, they always sell out very, very quickly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. I enjoyed working on the Camano Map. And in fact, if you go to my website, I have a blog that's how I make a map.
Okay.
And I actually use that map of Camano Island as my example. And I took photos during every stage. And there's a little GIF at the end where you can see how the map comes to life. And I explain each part of my process.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. That is one of my favorite maps. I think the shape of Camano is so pretty. So I was really pleased with how that turned out.
Nice. So what was that process of when you start a map, and we'll use Camano as an example, what was your process when you were starting that?
Sure. Well, I always start with some research, and when I do a map of a location like Camano, I look up reference maps. So I don't copy any one map. That's, first of all, you shouldn't do that,
Yeah.
So I get multiple sources, and any government-made maps for the most part are copyright free. So that's a great resource, and they're really organized, and you can find maps. I try to find a locally made map so I can get local words for things, and I encounter that a lot with island names, like in the San Juan Islands. Everyone's got a different name for some islands, and I got to make a decision of what to use. So it's always helpful to have the local insight. And then I also like to find an old map if I can, because those are often hand-drawn or more beautiful. Then I use my graphic design background and I overlay them in a computer program called Adobe Illustrator, which is my happy program. That's the one I'm most familiar with. I layer them, and because of the Earth is round and maps are flat, there's a projection issue. So for a small island like Camano, it's not a big deal. But if I do a map of, let's say, all of Washington State, distortion comes into play because there are all different ways to flatten a round object, all different mathematical formulas. Yeah. So you get into like the Mercator projection and all these different kinds of projections. So there's a little side tangent about map projection. But Camano is more straightforward. So most of the maps align pretty well. And I can use reference. And so I do a pencil grid, which is something that like little kids are taught in art classes, is you draw a grid over your reference photo or material. And then you draw, I use a light pencil line to draw a grid on my watercolor paper. Okay. And I draw freehand within that grid. But the reason I do that grid is to be accountable to the overall shape, because I'm trying to be very accurate. Yeah. It's not, I'm not interpreting how this island looks. Like I am drawing it as exactly as I can at the scale I'm drawing it. So I do a 1-inch grid and draw freehand within that in pencil. Mm-hmm. Then I take a waterproof ink pen. I use a Lamy ink pen. It's made in Germany, and I can refill it with whatever ink I want. And then I ink my illustration, and then I label everything in pencil first, and that's I can write pretty straight freehand, but spelling that's the thing I need to make sure I spell it correctly. And so then I erase everything. So I've got kind of made myself my own coloring sheet basically. Yeah. And then I take watercolor. I use mostly M. Graham and some Daniel Smith watercolor. And I apply it pretty quickly to the painting because watercolor dries so quickly. And, everything matters with watercolor. Like if it's hot outside, it's going to dry faster. If it's a really rainy day, I've got a little more time to work and move the water around my paper before it dries. Okay. And I'm kind of a do it all in one shot kind of painter. Like I don't do a ton of layers. I'm not like a professional studio watercolorist. I use watercolor to illustrate my maps. So I'm still getting to know watercolor. We're friends, but we aren't best friends. And I'm always a little bit surprised with how the color turns out, because that's kind of why you use watercolor. It's got a mind of its own. Water does funky things. You can like flick paint in it. You can do salt. You can do all these different things to adjust the texture of watercolor. And then it dries a little lighter than when I paint it, so that I come back to it and see how it looks.
Yeah.
And then my final step, I get it professionally scanned, and then I use Adobe Photoshop to do edits. And I typically don't have heavy edits. I try to make the original pretty close to the final product, but if I misspell something, I can fix it in Photoshop. Or if I splattered too aggressively off the page, I can fix that up in Photoshop.
Okay.
And then I frame and sell my originals in shows like the one I have up here at Camano.
Yeah.
And then I also make a lot of prints that I sell online and in stores.
Okay.
So yeah, that's my process, start to finish.
Nice.
And for more details on the technical side, just check out my website, elizabethperson.com.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll have that in the show notes for sure.
Oh, awesome. Great.
Nice. So then when you were doing your research for Camano, did you come out here a lot and explore the island? What was kind of that like?
No, I didn't. I don't like to map places I haven't been if possible.
Okay.
But I've been to Camano, so I had I have a experience, and I had a sense of the look of the island. I would do a little more research if it were somewhere, like let's say I was doing a map of Cuba, I would probably do a little more research online to like, what are the colors of the flag? What are the colors of the countryside? What does this place look like?
Yeah.
But for somewhere like Camano, that was more familiar to me. It wasn't too hard to come up with that kind of detail. But I did have to do a lot of research on locations, and I found like the Historic Society map that identified different historical locations.
Yeah.
And then I decided to really go all in on the detail on Camano Island more than I do typically. Like I've included all the fire stations. I think there are 5. I think that's right.
I think so. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah.
There are a lot, yeah. And I don't usually do that level of detail. And then I also included some historical sites. I included all the neighborhood names, and they are like in little white banners, like just the casual names that probably only locals would know. And I certainly wasn't familiar with many of them, but used a few different sources to find those names.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, no, Camano is like it's part of why I started the podcast, but there's so much oral history almost around Camano of like the people that have been here for a long time, or like the schoolhouse, the people that have been tracking all of this stuff around the history of Camano and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of hidden meanings in different areas around the island. And so there's a lot of stuff to explore and like keep learning about.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I should say, I knew there was something special about Camano people, because I did a map of Whidbey Island. And, you know, Camano is cradled so nicely in it. I just included, so it was Whidbey Camano. And I call that map my Whidbey Camano map. Well, at every art festival, people would say, do you have a map of just Camano Island? And I got that request like, I don't know, 20 times. So I was like, okay, they want their own map. So there's something special about this island. People really love it. And then as I worked on it, I posted photos on Instagram, and I actually got several people who gave me feedback like, hey, there's a park here you didn't include, or hey, like you might want to consider including this part, or hey, you misspelled this. So it was really fun to get real-time feedback from my followers who live here.
Yeah, very cool. Nice. So tell us a little bit about the pieces that you're bringing to the art show here on Camano.
Yeah, well, I actually have my original Camano map. Nice. Which I'm excited to, bring back to its rightful birthplace. And I also have an original map of Fidalgo Island, so the kind of the greater Anacortes area. And I have I brought a little original of Mount Rainier, and I actually just made a sticker, and so it's my original painting of Mount Rainier sticker. And that's a cute little 8x8. And then I have, I brought my children's book, To Live on an Island. I've got copies of that available. And then I have that Whidbey Camano map I referenced. I've got prints of that. And I've got a lighthouse painting. And so I stuck mostly with maps and kind of water theme, I would say.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. So what is kind of what do you see as the future? You've come obviously a very long way to get to where you are now. What do you see as the future of your business?
That's an excellent question. I think about this a lot. I feel really fortunate that my company has grown every year, and I have choices now, which is so nice. And something I think about a lot is, do I want to continue to grow my business, or do I want to kind of keep it at a manageable size where it's just myself and my assistant who can manage it? And man, I could have another conversation about all that business strategy, but I think that I don't want to fall into the trap of grow, like why? Sometimes the question is why? Why not just chill for a while and coast,
Yeah.
And I do love what I do, and it really lights me up. And I love that I get to do so much local work. Right now I have 2 projects for like one for Historic Everett and a lot of local companies I get to work with. And it's so fun to do a drawing and then like see it on a t-shirt for the YMCA, and just to see my art around here. And I used to think I'd have to move to Seattle to sustain myself as an artist, but I mean, I've been perfectly happy in Snohomish County. And 2 years ago I got a studio in North Everett. And it's by appointment only, but people can come, and I'll do open house hours in the holidays. But I got a studio because I needed space, and I'd grown out of my home. I had a room in my home as a studio, and I just needed more space to pack orders and carry products. And all my shows, when I do a whole booth at a show, I need to store all that, like my tent and my tent weights and all that. So I feel really thankful to have options and to feel like I can go in a lot of different directions right now. So I think my favorite thing, though, is just drawing whatever I want, and it's usually a new map. So I look forward to making I also do mountain ranges. So I'm looking to expand my line of mountain ranges. And I just got back from a trade show. I was at the Pacific Northwest Bookseller Association in Portland, Oregon, at their annual trade show as an exhibitor.
Okay.
And so trying to get more bookstores in the Northwest to carry my work. Yeah. And that was a really fun show. And I would love to expand the number of stores that carry my work. And I'm in about 50 stores in the Puget Sound area. And now I've got about 6 stores in Oregon that carry my work. So kind of expand out. But the Northwest is home, and I love making art about this place. And it feels like there's endless things I can map and chart and label. So I'm happy with the direction I'm going, although I don't always know what direction it is.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think that is definitely, I think it's a question as far as the business is concerned of deciding really what is the goal of the business, and what is, what do you see as success for the business? Is that continuous growth, or is that getting it to a size where it, easily pays for everything you need it to, but doesn't completely consume your life. And we've seen, I've talked to a lot of different business owners and seen both spectrums of that. And how far can we take this thing? And then people who have decided, this is as big as we want to get, and they purposely cut off, other options for themselves as far as like growth ways, because they're like, no, we want it still manageable within what we've created. Yeah,
I definitely don't want to feel like it's in charge of me. And I don't want to work 24/7. I try to work about 50, sometimes 60 hours a week, but that feels reasonable. And I want to enjoy what I do as much as possible.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, I like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions. So the first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most in the last 3 months?
Ooh. Well, I just spent about $100 on children's books, just for myself, because the illustrations were so beautiful. I was at this bookstore in Portland, Green Bean Books, and man, I had so much fun there. And I just think some of the best art is in children's books. I'm an illustrator, so that's my favorite kind of art, where it's illuminating a narrative. So, man, that's just my favorite kind of art.
Very cool. All right, pretend you have a friend coming from out of town. What would the first day look like?
Well, I love to show off Everett because I think it's a little underrated, and I don't know what the view of Everett is in Camano, but I think it's a wonderful place to live. So I would try to show them how how West Coast old this area is, and how there's a lot of history here. And I love something I love about Everett is how walkable it is. So I love to walk around downtown and walk to the water, and I love showing people views of the water from where I live, and I'm sure that's something that your listeners can relate to, since there's so much water around here, and the Puget Sound is so beautiful, and our sunsets are out of control, and we get to look at a national park. The Olympic National Park is just across the way, so I try to show off the beauty of this area.
Nice. What are some places in Everett for people to check out?
Well, the Shack Art Center is wonderful in downtown Everett. It's actually free for almost all their exhibits. So right now they've got a fall exhibit. And then we have tons of sports in Everett. There's minor league baseball, the Aqua Sox. We've got minor league hockey, the Silvertips. I just went to a Seattle Krakens game in Everett last week,
nice.
which was awesome. So you can, I live less than a mile from all these arenas and get to watch sports. My husband's an avid fan, I should say. My love of sports is new. And then other recommendations for Everett would be Narrative Coffee in Everett. But I mean, you guys have a pretty killer coffee shop right here. So I don't know why you'd go to Everett for coffee when you've got.
I always love seeing other coffee shops and bakeries and kind of eclectic stores and stuff like that. Like I just actually went and visited Arlington Hardware because I've heard so much about them. And it's just neat to see how other people have done it and get new ideas for the store and stuff like that.
That's true. Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. And I will say one other, I really recommend the taco truck, El Mariachi. Okay. They're awesome. And they pop up a lot of at-large brewery in Everett. So it's a pretty great combination. And at-large happens to have a garage door that lifts up and views the Everett waterfront and the sound right there.
Nice. I don't think I've ever been down that way. Or know where that is.
Oh yeah, they're off Marine View Drive, and they specialize in IPAs, especially Northeast IPAs.
Okay.
Very delicious.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah, I'm always also looking for kind of off the beaten path food options and stuff like that because there's just a lot of great food in this area, and unless you live in that city or you know people that do, you don't usually see them all.
Totally.
So, very cool. Who is an interesting or fascinating person in this community or around that that would I should interview next?
Oh, that is a great question. Well, I think that I love hearing from, man, this sounds old when I say this. I'm in my 30s, but I love hearing from young people. I like knowing what's going on and what they're interested in and what's next, who are going to be the future people leading the city, and what their vision is and what makes them upset and what they enjoy. So I think it'd be kind of cool to hear from I don't know, maybe some high schoolers who go to the local high school or, I don't have a specific recommendation, but if there are any new business owners or anyone who's younger than me and see where they're at and what's on their minds.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a general recommendation.
Yeah. No, that's good. All right. And lastly, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Well, I would say I would encourage myself, I guess, two things. One is I feel I guess be yourself. People don't really care as much as you think they care. And I think that's a lesson I realize how much that's true every year. And I would impress upon my younger self, people really don't care. Do your thing, you know, do whatever you want. For example, today I got ready and I didn't feel like putting on shoes. So I just wore my Birkenstocks with my sandals. I'm I don't care. I'm going to be comfortable today. Yeah. So I would never have done that 10 years ago. And I'm going to dress up because I'm going to go out and I'm going to do, and then also I think what makes you unique. So I think I'm a big planner. I'm a big, I'm a nerd out on details. That's why, I do these really detailed maps. I love that kind of stuff. And, here now it's my career. So lean into that, lean into the things that make you quirky and unique. And they can become a big asset, I think, in the future if you use them in the right way.
Nice. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Elizabeth Person for joining me on the podcast, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us find more Islanders like yourself. And for more information on this episode, you can go to CaminoCommons.com/podcast. That's CaminoCommons.com/podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.